My name is Jayfrey, and today I'm going to be talking about the 5 rules to follow to reach Infinite in the new season of Marvel Snap. I've reached Infinite for every season since the game officially released. Last season, I reached Infinite within a week because of Zabu, and these are some things that I've garnered together, I've noticed, I've built good habits on that I think you should too if you want to reach Infinite for this season or any season. So rule number 1 can be something that's kind of obvious to people who have played card games before, but it might not be too obvious for newbies of card games or Marvel Snap in general, and that's define your deck archetype. What this means is you want to have a deck with synergy. You'll notice that I have many different types of decks here, and I've put them in like the parentheses here. For example, I have a Zoo deck, Sarah Surfer, Death Surfer, Move, and a Ramp deck. When you first start Marvel Snap, you'll notice that you don't really need to have synergy. You can kind of just throw random cards together and you'll win, but you reach a certain point where that doesn't work anymore. For me, when I first started, that was around rank 40. I started to notice that people had decks with more synergy. So you need to figure out what type of deck kind of fits your playstyle, and you also have to build it so that the cards actually work together. So for example, I have a Zoo deck here, and these cards work together because a Zoo deck is consisted of low cost cards to overwhelm your opponent. The most important cards in this deck would be Khazar to power up your 1 cost cards and Blue Marvel to power up all of your cards. Another example of a deck that I've used is a Ramp deck, and this is a deck that is all about slow early game turns, but you build up an extra energy so that you can play high power cards on turns 4, 5, and 6. You utilize cards like Electro to increase your max energy, and by turn 4 you can play a 5 cost card like Arrow or Vision, typically Vision, or you can play Wave, which would allow you to play a 6 power card on turn 4. You could play Doctor Doom, and then later on you can play Odin on turn 6 or 5. Rule number 1 is something that's pretty obvious, but if you're a complete beginner to card games, it's not something that you would really know right away. Rule number 2 relates to rule number 1, and that's understand your win condition. What this means is that you're gonna have a specific way to win with each deck that you create, and that's gonna be something that you have to pay attention for every time you draw a card, or you don't draw a card, or a card is destroyed or discarded. For example, our Ramp deck is heavily dependent on Electro and Wave because they allow us to play our high cost cards on turns 4, 5, and 6. If we don't draw these cards, it would be very hard to win with this deck because all of our cards cost so much. Another example of this is Zabu. If you don't draw Zabu on turns 3 and 4, you essentially just lose the game because all of your cards are 4 costs or 6 costs, at least for my deck, and if you don't draw him, you'll only be able to play 3 cards by the end of the game, and that'll definitely not be enough power to overwhelm your opponent. To understand your win condition more, I would recommend playing a deck consistently rather than playing multiple decks, because when you play one deck, it'll also teach you what cards you need to put in and what cards to take out. You'll notice at your rank that you're going to play against decks that are very similar to each other, or you're going to play the same types of decks consistently. So you want to have your own deck that you can be consistent with, so you can basically build counters for, or you can take cards that don't work or put cards that do work. Rule number 3 is something that I feel like is overlooked and not talked about a lot, even by the big YouTubers, and this is understanding priority. Priority means that you're going to play your cards first, or you're going to flip your cards first. Priority is determined by whoever's winning the board, so if you're winning 2 locations, your opponent's only winning 1 location, you'll notice that your name will be glowing, meaning you're going to be first. If you guys are both tied at the moment, and whoever is going first is going to be randomized. This is something that if you pay attention to, you'll be able to counter your opponents more. Some opponents that you play against will kind of just throw out their cards like really quickly, 1, 2, 3. If you pay attention more, you'll be able to understand their playstyle. You might notice what deck they're playing, and it will also help you decide what cards to put in your deck that can help you. And some of these cards will help supplement your win condition, like Shang-Chi, Enchantress, and Killmonger. There are many times that your opponent's not going to expect you to draw Shang-Chi or Killmonger, but when you play it on turn 5 and 6, it will allow you to win. but if you don't have priority, you won't be able to destroy as many cards as you would have. Overall, I think this is a rule that if you notice more while you're playing, you'll have better games. Rule number 4 is something that even I fail to follow sometimes, and that's do not ego snap. What this means is that you snap just because your opponent snaps. There are many times that you're playing right and your opponent snaps on turns 1 or 2, and at that moment you don't really have a board, you don't really know if you're gonna win. There's definitely something psychological about snapping because it has that gambling aspect to it, but snapping every single time is gonna cost you a lot of cubes and a lot of rank. This also goes hand in hand with rule number 5, which is the most important rule. Retreat when the probability of winning is too low. If there's anything to take away from this video, it's this rule. A lot of people don't realize that getting to infinite is a marathon and not a sprint. It's a very long grind to get to infinite, so you have to play many games. And if you don't have a good habit of retreating, you're gonna just continue being stuck. I see a lot of people complaining about being stuck in like rank 40 to 60, or people complain about playing against meta decks, and it's understandable, but at the same time, I think a lot of these people don't know when to retreat. I've played against many people where they're at a losing board, they still continue playing against me, and I just take all of their cubes. I usually abide by the 70-30 rule, which means if I have a 70% chance to win, then I'll continue playing the game, but if I don't, then I may retreat. If you ever reach ranks 80 to 100, you'll notice that a lot of people retreat in the early turns. Some people retreat on turn 2 and 3 because they're at a huge disadvantage when they look at their cards. So if you're playing a Mr. Negative deck and they don't have Mr. Negative by like turn 2 or 3, they retreat. Same with Zabu. If they don't have Zabu by turns 3 or 4, they retreat. To get to the higher ranks, it's not all about building the best deck or having the best meta deck, but it's about understanding how the game works. Marvel Snap isn't like other card games where the better deck just wins. It's also about the snapping aspect, the cubes. Like I said in the previous rule, there's a psychological effect with snapping, so you need to understand that the game is kind of like gambling. You need to know when to cut your losses. This wraps up the video. I hope what I talked about was informational to you. If it was, please like and subscribe, maybe drop a comment below. If you ever want to talk or get advice about your deck or anything, I'm always on Twitter at jfreesnap. Good luck and have a good day.